Okay, so this is going to be slightly different to the last two, in that this is far more of a walk through things to think about and options and so on. There are no magic answers to any of this. I've had a few excitements over the piece with storage, and we'll come to them. I read all the photographer forums online, and I follow what they're saying, and sometimes I followed their advice and it's not been good advice. None of this is easy, this bit, but I will walk you through to the stage at the end where you've got a bit of an understanding of where I think we're coming from. So what is it we're going to look at? Well, first of all, we're going to look back at the history of things. Who's that drawing on the screen? That ain't me. We're going to look back at the history of photography and photos and videos as well. And then we're going to look at where they can be stored and the various options for that, the pluses and minuses of some of them. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. However, I've no idea, are you all seeing red lines in the screen? Yeah, I've no idea where they came from. Wasn't me, big boy did it and ran away. We'll just keep going without them. 2 weeks ago, we looked at editing. And this actually, I'm going to look back at that just for a couple of minutes for the reason, A, to show you what I have done myself in editing recently, but more importantly, to start looking at old photographs, because storing photographs isn't just the ones you've taken on your Samsung Galaxy or your iPhone. It's photographs, and you want them all in one place and safe. Way back in 1928, and I can pretty well confirm that was the date, my father at this point was 6 years old, and he grew up on a croft, and one of the neighbors had a camera, and in those days taking photographs was very expensive. So you took one photograph of something, and if you're very clever, you developed and printed it yourself, and it was still very expensive. So he turned up at the family farm, or in those days it was still a croft, it's now the biggest farm in the area, and took this photograph of my grandfather, my two uncles and my father. The one at the small one at the left-hand end, that's my father. That's how I know when it was taken. And they're out singling turnips, and I've no idea what it is, but my father said it's the worst thing you could ever do. So I worked in this photograph for all of 10 minutes, maybe 15, and sharpened it up. All I did was remember we looked at the sharpening tool 2 weeks ago? What I did was I just sharpened it up, and then in a few areas, I just fixed the fact that that it was too dark or too bright, and we've got that as a result. Having got that photograph, I actually got some of the story about that from my father. So it prompted memories with him looking at this old photograph. But I've got these two photographs, the original and the worked on version, and they're here, but they're not on my phone. So let's take it a bit wider. The history of photography goes back quite a way, and these aren't mine, but when we started to downsize from the big house we were in to here, we had drawers full of old negatives, old slides, the whole lot. And if you go back to the very beginning, the first images that you see were on glass slides. They scratched. Glass has a habit of breaking if you drop it or are careless, and the images aren't stable. So the first black and white images on these glass slides are becoming less and less robust. They're also on tin plate. I don't know if you ever saw tin plate photographs, but they were quite common, and they were literally tin plates put in the back of a camera, covered in emulsion, and exposed for quite a length of time. And if you look very closely at the little, that's not a family one, I grabbed that one off the net, you'll actually see they're sticking their heads through holes in a set to take that photograph. The trouble is that breaks down as well. Also, photographers were taking photographs on paper and on leather, basically anything that could hold the emulsion long enough. Then film came along in 1889. To begin with, it was just black and white, but quite quickly, there were colour photographs. They are very, very rare. They were extremely expensive, and you had to process them yourselves. However, film in those days was dangerous. Both still film, still negatives, and movie negatives, because they were starting to make moving pictures, they were actually very unstable, and they had this habit of catching fire. And in fact, a number of cinemas burned down because the film caught fire. It's at the stage, in fact, the German Federal Archive, where they have all these films, the films are stored in an atmosphere with no oxygen, only nitrogen, because they're classified as being explosives. So if you've got any of those kicking around the house, call canny, as we say. So moving forward, what have we got? Well, when I started to digitize what we've got, we have prints of all sizes, from the tiny box brownie images, the quality of which is superb, up to big prints that were taken by the likes of Jerome's in Edinburgh, but every town seemed to have a photographer you went to. So you've got all these photographs of aunts and uncles, grannies and granddads, great granddads, kicking around somewhere, and they need to be preserved somehow. And we've got negatives of all sizes, from the little Instamatic ones that were so small you needed a magnifying glass to see, up to the bigger ones that Kodak were punting out for quite a while. And we've got colour film. That's from 1936 onwards. That is the year that colour film was first being sold. So we've got 90 years of colour prints kicking around. And of course, I've also got boxes of slides, because slides were cheaper than buying film. So a lot of people did that. And we're a fairly normal family when it comes to that, possibly slightly more camera minded, because my grandfather on one side did photography and actually ran a small business at it for a while. But most families have got this sort of stuff kicking around. And then, of course, you've got albums of prints, the old beautiful albums that kicked around, and we've got loads and loads and loads of those. And sometimes they're in some sort of order, and sometimes they're not. And then on top of that, we've got irreplaceable memories on cine film, 8mm or 16mm. And it was wonderful. And at one point, it seemed that everyone you knew had a cine camera and a projector. Unfortunately, if you've got 8mm cine film kicking around, finding some way to even look at it is very, very difficult. The film has gone brittle, and if you try and run it through a projector, the chances are it will just break. But there are companies that will take your cine film and turn it into something. And if they put it on DVD, well, that's okay. We'll come back to DVD in a couple of minutes. And then about 40 odd years ago, when VHS and Betamax were out there, all of a sudden we also had camcorders. The first camcorder, if you remember it, was that long. And in fact, I borrowed one from the theatre workshops to make some training videos for the scouts I was with at the time. The camera was like this. over your shoulder. I then had 3 meters of cable to another guy who was walking around, who had a full-size VHS camera recorder and battery, VHS recorder and battery pack with it. So we were walking around, you know, absolutely crazy trying to do it, doing everything that my phone can now do just automatically and without spending £1,000 of money buying the stuff. But there's a lot of VHS and Betamax around because a lot of people bought camcorders to record the kids growing up, family parties and weddings, that, you know, that cruise we did down the Rhine, blah, 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 and so on. We've also got sometimes stuff on DVDs, you know, because some of these camcorders actually recorded straight onto DVDs, and then all these video memories that we've got on phones and tablets, we now take video almost disposably. I've got video clips of the cruise that we did going down the Rhine, where you can hear the, you know, the boats and the birds on the side of the river and so on. What am I doing with it? Well, the first thing is to make sure I don't lose it. The danger is that these things tend to fade. The old physical media are a problem. Glass slides deteriorate fast. The emulsion all of a sudden is starting to break down. They need kept effectively in low oxygen fridges, but they're not stable. Old negatives fade. They mottle, a little bit of damp or a little bit of heat. And very often the negatives were thrown away and we kept the prints. But the prints were poorer quality than the original negative. So what you've got is that the prints that we've got remaining, you can't recreate because you don't have the negatives. And that's a pity because some of these negatives were amazing. What happens to color prints? Well, we've got pictures taken when our kids were younger, and they've all gone a wonderful shade of purple because the dyes deteriorate at a different rate. And the net result of this is you increasingly get a color cast coming in on your old color prints. And of course, we've thrown out the color negatives. The prints that we've got, whether they were taken in 1880 or 1980, they get dusty, they get damp and a bit of mildew. The paper appears to attract a certain kind of worms, so you'll see worm tracks in some of them, or worse, they get, you know, the corners get folded and you get those crack lines on them. So the images that we've got are not great. And of course, old slides discolor. Now, the next is a photograph off a slide taken of our daughter and youngest son at the family farm, which has moved on a little bit, as you can see from the croft that you saw at the beginning. But look at the colour of it. A lot of the colour has completely swapped, and there's a lot of mottling on it. And short of spending hours patching out that mottling, that picture is very close to being unusable. And yet, in the family terms, it's actually an important historical document of its kind. So the key thing is to prevent further loss of things that are important. And that's a phrase I'm going to stick to, because it is those things that are important. The best solution for your negatives and your prints is to scan and fix them. Now, there's loads and loads of ways of fixing, and I'll just spend a minute or two talking about this. Once upon a time, scanners were big, complicated, heavy, expensive, and required a computer genius to use because there were so many toys on them, tools to change this and change that. A huge number of printers now come as all-in-ones, which will not only do scanning, but faxing, if anyone uses fax anymore, but for duplicating it. So you have a document, you put it in the scanner and it prints you a copy of it, and that's great. But it does mean that scanning is now available very widely. I had a professional class scanner until 18 months ago, a rather expensive UMax, which I bought. Beautiful machine, but it was big and clunky. And I read a review of an Epson scanner, not that particular model, but an all-in-one one. And it seemed to say that it was scanning at the same level as my big professional one, and yet there's just a consumer printer with a scanner thrown in. So I ordered it from Amazon on the basis if I didn't like it, I'd send it back and it didn't cost me anything. And actually, it's better than my professional scanner is. So all those old black and white and color prints can be scanned in, digitized, and stored somewhere. And we'll come back to the somewhere bit. But we have the ability now to look after all of them. Those negatives, well, you scan it as a negative and tell the software it's a negative, and it flips it so that all of a sudden it becomes a positive. It becomes the right way around again. So that actually works quite well. Then you can store these like new photographs. So all of a sudden you've got all of these old photographs and new photographs in a digital form somewhere. You can then organize them into, now let's call them albums. It's not like the old albums where you stuck a photograph in the album. The album on your phone or on a disk drive is just a way of understanding what it is. So all the photographs taken on the trip to Crete or at Jenny's wedding or whatever you've got, you put them in there and you can find them again. And it's also worthwhile, if you can be bothered, against each of these images, giving them keywords. So if Brother John appears in photographs all over the place, if you put that keyword into all the photographs where John appears, whether it's childhood ones or much newer ones, you can then very quickly search for John. And all the photographs that involve John will suddenly be available to you. And well, do we have any photographs of John when we were down at the beach in 1963? Well, if you've tagged the beach shots with the word beach, you say John and beach, and all the photographs in which John is at the beach anywhere that you have tagged, you'll find. Now that's extremely useful. What's even cleverer is that on your phone and in many other places, which we'll come back to, the software will actually look at the photographs, and if it recognizes John and knows who he is, you can put his name in without having had to tag him. But it's not always accurate. The favorite demonstration I've got, story against myself again, is if I put my brother's name into my iPhone and then the word beer, which does appear to pop up with him quite often, every time he is standing there with a pint in his hand or a glass on the table will pop up. Because the software on your phone, your tablet, and other places actually is able to understand the context of the photograph. Is that not scary? They know you from your face. So you've got this mountain of photographs, which you can never find the one photo you're looking for or whatever else. Where are you going to store this stuff? Well, that's just a snapshot of one of my albums on my phone. Now, I'm going to be very careful here, and there's a risk of confusing people, but I don't want to do that. If you have on your phone, say 5,000 photographs, and you put some into an album of beach, some into an album of winter, whatever, there is no physical change anywhere except if you go into the beach album or the winter album, you can see all the pictures that you have tagged for that album, but they're not actually physically stored separately. It's just a list of, go and look at this picture, go and look at that picture. So if you delete a picture from an album, you don't delete the picture. But if you delete the picture from the main bit, you do delete it from the album because it's gone for good. And that's slightly different to what I was saying about the photographs that you import, because if you put them in an album, that's where they live. So there's a beautiful confusion in the use of the word albums, which I'm aware people are going to get caught on. The other thing you can do with photos, not just albums, but individual photos, is share them. Now, I'm an Apple user, and if I take, say, a dozen photos, well, I did actually at my brother's birthday in the summer, we were all carefully socially distanced in his back garden, and I took a whole series of photographs. By the time I got home, my iPhone had realized that I'd been at his house because it knows the location, and that there were photographs, and do you want to share these photographs with your brother? And it tagged all the photographs that I've taken and said, do you want to share them with him? And if I'd said yes, it would have sent him a copy of those photographs. And that sort of sharing becomes very easy, very automatic. And it means that he gets the photographs that he didn't take. And of course, conversely, he could share photographs with me of things. So when they're on the device, sharing becomes very, very easy. However, yes, Margaret, you want to unmute? Yes.
How does your iPhone know your brother's address?
It knows as it well. Right, I'll give you the long answer, and because he is in my contacts list.
Yeah.
And his address is in the contacts list.
Yeah.
Therefore, it knows the geographical location. My iPhone has also got GPS built into it, so it knows the location, so it knows where I am. If I take a photograph at my house, it will tag the photograph as home. If I go 20 yards along the street and take a photograph, it will give the street address because it knows I'm not at home.
Does my phone as well?
Almost certainly, unless you've switched it off.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, but it gets cleverer because, of course, also because I've tagged my brother's face in some things, it also knows what he looks like. So if he pops up in a photograph anywhere, it will tag him in and say, is this, my brother's called Ali, is this Ali? And I can say yes or no. And each time I say yes or no, it knows better what he looks like, so it can tag him in future photographs.
So does it know he's your brother because of the address in your contact book?
It knows, in the contacts, it also has him down as my brother.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. So it knows. And it's the same with my wife. I mean, if I'm in the car, I can say, I won't say the magic word because everything in the house will jump and try and do it. But I can say, magic word, whether it's Siri or Alexa or whatever, send a message to my wife.
Yeah.
It will look up and say, oh, his wife is that person. What message do you want to send?
Yeah.
So phones are, and in particular, but all of this stuff is trying to tie things together.
Okay.
Which is both a good thing and a bad thing, because it means they know more and more about us.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Do you want to mute again, Margaret, for the moment?
Okay. Got it.
So there are limits on how many photos your device can store, and that limit is the size of the memory. If you take a lot of photographs, the memory will fill up quicker. If you take very high quality photographs, the memory will fill up quicker because high quality pictures are bigger. And if you take much video, that will run away with memory, believe it. So if you take a lot of high quality video, very, very quickly, you can use up the memory space. And that's why manufacturers, charge more for bigger memory phones, because people using bigger memory phones are going to be heavier users and are going to be willing to pay a bit more for it. And that's just the ones that you're taking on your device. All of the scanned ones on top, you're not going to store those on your phone. Realistically, no, but we'll come back to that. So you've got all your photographs that you've taken recently. Let's ignore all the scanned ones, but you've got all the photographs and videos that you've taken on the phone. You've got them nicely categorized with your friend's name, the bridge group. Katie's got all the people in her pub quiz team all carefully tagged and so on. What happens when you change phone? Where do these photographs go? Well, if you're sticking in, I'll use the horrible word ecosystem, if you're moving from one Apple phone to another, as I did last week, or if you're moving from one Samsung phone to another, it's relatively straightforward to transfer from one to the other. With the iPhone, all I had to do was basically touch the two phones together and say, this is a new phone, and all the settings came across, and within an hour, barring the passwords on my bank accounts, which they had to go through a re-authentication. But the new phone was identical to the old one. All my photographs were there, and it was invisible. But if you change, say, from a Samsung to a Huawei, which are both Android phones, it's not necessarily that simple. So changing phones is a complication. Killing your device is a complication. Drop it. And I watched it happen once. A couple were taking photographs in a bar, having a laugh. The girl went to put her phone back in her bag, missed it, and it dropped face down on the tiles in the bar floor. And that was that device gone. So what happens to all the photos on it? What happens to everything, all of our contacts? The device is dead. What happens if you drop it in the water? My dear brother, who I was talking about, got a brand new phone, and within 24 hours had dropped it down the toilet. There's a moral in there somewhere, and he hadn't been drinking beer at the time. It was just sheer bad luck. But it happens. What happened? And again, I was hearing a story about somebody took some photographs, put the phone down on the table, were chatting, turned round, and the phone had gone. And they've no idea yet, but somebody had walked past and lifted the phone, and they hadn't spotted it. What happened? Well, okay, you lose the phone is replaceable. You can lock the phone, you can get it back off insurance. But the photos that you've taken might not be replaceable. It might have been an event you were at, or something that happened, something important. The value of these photos actually can be quite devastating, because the more images that we have, the greater the harm if they're lost. And if you have 2 or 3 photographs, they're replaceable, probably. But if you've got a few hundred, or in my case, a few thousand photographs, some of them of places I might not go back to, some of them of events, all that sort of stuff, all of a sudden, the harm of losing them escalates, and These things can't be replaced. If we are trying to capture a moment in time because it's important to us, the loss of that can actually be quite devastating. Just in passing, my wife spotted an advert on Facebook, and I've seen the same advert on Instagram, which is a photo sharing website, for a memory stick that plugs into your phone, your tablet, your laptop, whatever, and collects all the photographs together and puts them into some sort of order and automatically deletes duplicates, because we all have duplicate photographs. A great idea, because it means you've got them all, you know, you've got a copy of everything. The downside is it's so small, and it can be quite easy to lose, but it's a great idea. It's starting to get to the stage that we're thinking about having a safe copy of something. For a long time, there was a big thing on all the photographers' forums. Let's store all our photographs and DVDs. It's the way of the future. Because when CDs and then DVDs came out, people were saying quite correctly that these videos, that these, you know, the movies that you buy, whatever, they last forever. And they do. If you just look at any gardener, they've got CDs swinging in the breeze in their garden because they last forever and they're still readable. CDs and DVDs last forever. That's the ones that you buy with physically the movie or whatever on them. The ones that you can write on don't last forever. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a trip to Arizona, and we went right round the great state of Arizona. We went all the way around it. It's quite a drive. And we went to the Pueblo, we went to various cities, we went to look at the dinosaur footprints, we went to Monument Valley, and we stored them all on DVDs. When I went back 2 or 3 months later to pick up these DVDs and start to work on them, I discovered to my horror that DVDs that you burn using your DVD writer can actually be blanking. Unless you keep them vertically in the pitch dark and ideally in a fridge, DVDs are only guaranteed to last 90 days. The dyes on them don't last. And we lost 80% of those pictures, the irreplaceable ones. So I would say don't go anywhere near DVDs. And I took what was at that point best advice on how to store those pictures. Even worse, about the same time, because we came back from Arizona in the June, I was working on a project in a hospital in the Middle East. And next to the hospital that I was working on, there was an archaeological site, which I managed to get involved in helping doing their website. And I walked all around the archaeological site, taking lots of photographs. I went to do a presentation on that archaeological site to my church because the hospital was in Nazareth. And all my images were gone. So I had nothing. Having very carefully set them up, and some of these I was supposed to be putting onto the archaeological site's website, and that doesn't happen. So we already talked about always having a couple of copies of images. If you lose one, at least you've got them somewhere else. Maybe you keep them on your laptop or your desktop, as well as on your phone. And there's different ways of doing that, plugging it in and then importing them. At least every so often, you've got a copy of what's on your phone or your tablet on your laptop. That's a great idea. Maybe maybe use an external drive attached to the laptop to store them. That way saves filling up your laptop's memory, and external drives are fairly cheap. Or you could do a real belt and braces and have them on the laptop and the external drive, because each extra copy reduces the chance of losing those photos, those videos as well. And that's really first class, because you've then reduced the chance of losing them. Because as we've said, if they've got any value, losing them is actually, potentially quite devastating. However, if you've got your laptop and your desktop and your external drive, and you have, well, okay, maybe not going to have that kind of flood in Edinburgh, but all it needs is something as simple as a burst pipe, or a break-in or whatever, and that stuff vanishes and it's gone. Now, these are decreasingly likely things to happen. You're probably going to get away without that ever happening to you, but it does happen. And if there's a lot of value in these photographs and they are irreplaceable, the reality is insurance can't bring them back. The insurance might buy you a new desktop or laptop, they might buy you a new external drive, but they can't bring back those photographs. And I don't know about anybody else, but as we get older, those memories of childhood friends, in fact, some of the photographs I've got are of my mother and her childhood friends as well, and we've got the only copies of them. But it's something that I know that our kids, as they get older, are increasingly interested in. So it's the replaceable element, the risk element. So is there some way better than having lots of disk drives or memory sticks or whatever kicking around the house? We're looking for something that is really as low risk as possible, that is affordable, that doesn't involve you having chunks of disk drives kicking around the house in drawers or whatever, but is also secure. Well, the answer is there. The answer is the cloud. There are issues with it, and we'll very likely touch on some of them, but we've all heard of the cloud, Apple's iCloud, but there's tons of others. So what is the cloud? Well, dead simple. In the good old days, when I were but a lad, we used to put the Edinburgh office and the Glasgow office and the Aberdeen office, and we would connect them together via a network. And since nobody really understood networking apart from network geeks, and they were strange people who could have a whole conversation without using a word of English, we just used to draw a cloud as the bit in the middle. It would go into the cloud, which was the network and leased lines and fiber lines and all this nonsense, and using VSLAM devices and whatever else. And the connection would pop out in Inverness or Aberdeen, and that was it done. And all of a sudden, everyone was talking about the cloud as if they knew what it was, but actually it's just the bit in the middle that we don't fully understand. It's nebulous. So what is it? Well, actually, what the cloud is somebody else storing things for you these days. And Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, Dropbox, they're all fighting for that, because for them, it's an easy way to make money. They have vast centers with loads and loads of disk storage device. If I was to go onto the net and just ask Google or whoever I use for online photo storage, there will probably be 30 or 40 companies all offering some version of it. Basically, everything connects to the cloud. If you've got an iPhone, all my photographs automatically back up to Apple's iCloud, and then immediately pop up on my desktop and on my iPad. So the one photograph taken one place is everywhere. Samsung has something very different. So does Sony, so do Huawei. They all have their version of it because it has huge benefits from the user's perspective. So let's have a quick think about the various options. Amazon are offering their cloud, Amazon Photos. If you're a Prime member, they will store unlimited photographs. In my case, that's 70,000, but they will store all those photographs for nothing as long as I stay a Prime member. The videos I would have to pay for, but I've got a reasonable amount of storage because I've got a lot of family videos going back to digitized pictures going back to about 1950. So I've got a lot. But as a Prime member, I'm only paying a little bit each month for the video storage, and somebody else is carrying all the complexity and risk of looking after all that, making sure it's backed up. When I take a photograph on my iPhone, not only Apple take a copy of it, but Amazon take a copy of it. So it's on the Amazon Photos automatically. And the same would be true for anybody. They could, if they're an Amazon Prime member and they install that app, they can have all their photographs stored there. And the important thing is they are secure. As long as your Amazon account is secure and you've got a nice complicated password, then all your photos are secure there as well. Google also, they want a piece of this. Google want a piece of every pie, but they want a piece of this pie in particular. They have no limit on the number of photos that you can store, but they do reduce the quality. So if you store photographs on Google and you bring them back, you will notice that they're not quite as good as they uploaded. And again, you pay for any video that's stored. Dropbox, which is the name everyone knows, used to be a really low-cost option. It has now become really quite an expensive option. But they do store absolutely everything, and they will automatically synchronize from all your devices up to your account, and you can bring data back. It's just become a slightly clunky version of how to do it, but if it works for you, it is probably the best out there. But there's so many others. You have a look at how many photos you've got, how many videos you've got. Do you actually want to keep these things? And as long as you accept the fact that this cloud has got to be paid for, it can't be free. Actually, the cloud is a brilliant way of storing things, because it's like in the old days when they had maps, when the cartographers got to the edge of the world, and they didn't know what was there, they would just put, "Here be dragons." In other words, we don't know, it happens, it's way out there. Well, the cloud is way out there. But it's the easiest way to back up those photographs. Yes, have them on a laptop or a desktop or on a hard drive to hand. That gives you, it gives you safe local backup. But increasingly, I'm using the online ones to back up, to back up everything, because it's handy, it's integrated. I don't have to go to the room where the laptop is. I don't have to go hunting out the hard drive. They're all good of themselves, but a horses for courses thing. So, in summary, these things, they may only be irreplaceable to you, or they might be irreplaceable to friends, to family, whatever, but these things have got a value. It may be that the value of one photograph of that holiday is about zero, or it might be the last time that you and your parents and your aunt and uncle were together, and losing that would have no financial impact, but a big emotional impact. So it's worth storing everything. And very often you have no idea what the value of something is going to be later on. I don't know about anybody else. I've got this horrible habit of throwing something out after months of it kicking around, and within a week, oh, I wish I hadn't thrown that out. I think the same is true of photographs. You want two copies. There's the master copy, and that's the master copy on your, as far as your phone's concerned, is the phone. But if you've scanned it, the master copy would be your laptop, desktop, portable drive, whatever, and then the backup. Do you want to back up in the cloud? Some people are very concerned about it. There are ways that you can lock it down. You can set up the cloud version so it's not, in most cases, so they're not only protected by your password, but they are encrypted, and only you can actually open them because they're encrypted. Having said that, for photographs, I've actually found it quite good. Quite good to have these things not encrypted, and I don't have mine encrypted up on Amazon, for the simple reason that by doing it that way, Amazon can then do clever things, and it's creating albums of my brother or me and my wife or whatever, and they're looking at it and they're adding value to it. So there we are.